Wonder that the Ayatollah recently, I think last fall, said maybe we don't need to have a president. Yes, we do need to have a responsible president in Tehran. Now, turning finally to the issue of Camp Ashraf, this is an issue that I first encountered early in my tenure as the Assistant Secretary of State for Public Affairs at the State Department. I met with a delegation of concerned relatives of the residents of Camp Ashraf and have followed it keenly, since then. Now, I do think that it is of significance that at the end of last year there was this agreement negotiated by the United Nations with Iraq, and as many of us have said, it's a tribute to all of you and to Mrs. Rajavi that you have been so flexible and have been so forthcoming in trying to meet the requirements of this potential, this agreement and now this potential process. Now it's vitally important for the international community and the United States to turn this process into reality, and as many have said, with full appreciation and respect for dignity and fundamental human rights. Now, in this political world that we live in, politicians talk about the art of the possible. But everything that we hope to achieve with respect to Camp Ashraf is absolutely possible. It just, as Ed Rendell said earlier, it means the international community, including the United States, must simply do the right thing. Now, in this context, various countries are understandably asking, okay, we're going to be asked to help and support this process. What is the United States going to do? The United States has stated firmly and appropriately that it supports this UN process, and the United States needs to be an active part of the solution. And the best way to support this process is to finish the process that started well over a year ago regarding the foreign terrorist organization designation. The United States has made a political as well as a moral commitment to help protect the residents of Camp Ashraf, and it requires doing everything possible to make sure that all aspects of this process are respected, people are secure, people are safe, their dignity and their human rights are fully respected. Now, the United States must support this process. Now, there are a number of ways to accomplish this, but the only thing that the United States cannot do is stay on the sidelines. Thank you very much.
Die Mullahs haben sich zunehmend international isoliert. Zum einen, weil sie ständig die Menschenrechte mit Füßen treten und zum anderen, weil sie gegen den Willen der Weltgemeinschaft ein Atomprogramm durchziehen. Ich freue mich, dass inzwischen die EU Sanktionen gegen den Iran erlassen hat. Viel zu spät, aber sie zeigen erste Wirkungen. Und ich sage sehr deutlich, die Sanktionen können verstärkt werden. Zentrales Thema heute, am 33. Tag der Revolution, ist natürlich Camp Ashraf. Ich sage mit aller Deutlichkeit, die Umsiedlung nach Camp Liberty, ein gemeiner Name für das, was man vorhat, ist eine kaum zumutbare Maßnahme für die betroffene Bevölkerung. Die Vereinigten Staaten, die UN und die EU haben hier eine große politische und moralische Verantwortung für jeden Einzelnen. Dort die Zahl 3.500 ist abstrakt. Es geht um 3.400 Einzelschicksale.
We ask those who now say, the representatives of the United Nations, who say that that camp is habitable and is right for the residents. We ask them, would you place your daughters or sons in that camp? We ask them, would you be willing to live in that camp? When we hear of those facilities, I know that I would not be willing. And we say to the UN representatives, if you are not willing to live there, Why should you ask the residents of Ashraf to do so? As a citizen of the United States, a country that signed an agreement with every single resident of Ashraf, an agreement that assured them that they would be protected by the United States. So I stand and I ask my government, do not go back on your word. That would be a shame for us as Americans. We cannot stand by and allow the people of Ashraf to be herded into a prison camp called liberty. We cannot allow the forced removal of the residents of Ashraf, because that is not only against every international law, it is also against every moral law.
Let me just put it very bluntly. We are at a critical juncture and are faced with very hard choices and very huge risks. Because we're now at this crossroads, we must consider the use of force. This is not an invasion. This is not large-scale bombing of cities and industrial plants. This is force to destroy the known facilities. No one wants to use force. Every country would prefer a diplomatic, peaceful outcome. But this is a challenge for which there are no easy policy choices. Some, including the repressive regime in Tehran, argue that if force is used, all Iranians will rally around the regime as a nationalistic impulse. Others challenge that conventional wisdom, noting that the limited use of force would not alter the deep animosity of most Iranians toward the regime. Many of you are better able to answer that question than I am, but I will conclude, as I started off, by saying that the only real sustainable solution to the Iranian nuclear threat is the emergence of a free and democratic Iran. This is the greatest threat in the eyes of the regime. They've seen the movie over and over, going back to the lessons of Ceausescu in Romania, much more recently Gaddafi in Libya, and even today with their closest ally, Bashar Assad in Syria. The greatest fear of dictatorships is that of its own people. They know they lack legitimacy and that they rule only through the use of force and repression. That is why Camp Ashraf is such an important symbol. That is why the regime is so determined to destroy it and its residents. That is why it is so opposed to delisting of the MEK. But that is also why we must, in addition to meeting our legal and our moral commitments, act to preserve and protect that symbol of freedom. Thank you very much.
Le deuxième point, c'est oui qu'il faut des conditions honnêtes, humaines, pour les résidents d'Ashraf, où que ce soit, à Ashraf ou dans le prétendu camp Liberté. Je rappelle que la dernière réunion que nous avons faite, Ingrid Betancourt, elle a dit à partir de sa propre expérience que le statut actuel du camp Liberté n'est pas celui, évidemment pas celui d'un camp de réfugiés, évidemment pas non plus celui d'une prison. Parce que dans une prison, malgré tout, il y a des lois, il y a la possibilité de soins médicaux, il y a la possibilité d'avocats, etc. Non, il ne s'agit pas d'une prison, il s'agit d'un camp de concentration. Et ça, admettre cela, c'est une honte pour tous et un danger pour chacun. Après tout, quand on quitte un pays, quand on a pris des responsabilités dans un pays, comme l'a fait la coalition et en particulier l'état-major américain, on est responsable de ceux à qui on a dit qu'on les protégeait. Et si on n'arrive pas à les protéger sur place, il faut les accueillir chez soi. La solidarité avec Ashraf, c'est aussi l'ouverture des frontières.
Make no doubt, though, the residents of Camp Ashraf are determined, and no amount of Iraqi or Iranian influence is going to force them to give up their quest. These people will forfeit their lives before they will ever submit. They will not bow down to tyranny. They will not give up, even though they've been falsely labeled without any due process. They've been promised protection. I was there, part of that promise, only to see that promise broken. They've been tormented daily by their Iraqi captors. They've been run down in vehicles and gunned down. But do you see them leaving? No. They're standing strong. Well, Camp Liberty. I lived at Camp Liberty, but not under the concentration-like conditions that the residents are being forced into now. Ambassador Kobler, you haven't answered any of my phone calls. You have not replied to my emails. I volunteered at my cost to help you by coming over there. You ignore me. What are you helping me behind those 18-foot concrete walls? An American patriot stated before he was being executed during our American Revolution, "I only regret that I have but one life to give for my country." Make no doubt that every resident in Camp Ashraf believes in that, and they will give up their life before submitting and leaving their people, the people of Iran, to the tyranny of the murderous mullahs.
When the U.S. took over the camp in 2003, as General David Phillips has already mentioned, they did an extensive investigation. There were no ties to terrorism. I looked at the earlier intelligence that the State Department had, once it was unclassified, that had established some very nefarious links to terrorism. I looked at that intelligence. I could find nothing, based on my nearly 30 years of experience in the field of intelligence, that linked anyone from the MEK to any acts of terrorism. And just yesterday, there was a news report out that said that the MEK was behind the assassination of Iranian nuclear scientists. You may have seen it. It's been on several websites. Nothing could be further from the truth. And they quote in this report that it was according to unnamed U.S. intelligence officials. How convenient. Unnamed. Impossible to prove, and almost always, as in this case, completely erroneous. It is an act of desperation. Now, a few months ago, Secretary of State Clinton traveled to Tripoli to reassure the National Transition Council and their leadership of U.S. support. She announced new programs fostering closer U.S.-Libyan ties, a student exchange program, gave them an additional $40 million to help track down Gaddafi-era weapons. Now, the residents of Camp Ashraf are not asking for this type of assistance. They're not asking for outright political support, just the right to live in peace. And then thank you. When Secretary Clinton traveled to Kabul late last year, for what she described as, quote, a reality check, she discussed the recent assassination of the former Afghan President Rabbani. And in referring to him, she said, again, I quote Secretary Clinton, "He was trying to do the right thing." Secretary Clinton, it is time for you to do the right thing. Delist the MEK, and the time for further review, as Secretary Clinton told the Voice of America a few months ago, that time is over. Delist them now and ensure that the residents of Camp Ashraf are protected. Thank you.